Aloha and welcome back to Veterans Voices with Joe and SteveO. This is Joe, and we are here for season 2, episode 2 of our season. Go ahead, SteveO. Say hi to everybody.
Hi, everybody. It's good to see you again. So Joe had an interesting email he sent me yesterday about an experience he had at the VA that, Go ahead.
I was super frustrated with the VA yesterday. So for our show, we've decided in season 2, we're going to try to do a little bit of a new format where when we come on, we're going to talk just about like VA and experiences. And I think my experience yesterday was a great example of being your own advocate at the VA. So I'm sure that those of you who are veterans out there know that you can get care either at a VA facility or in care in the community, right? So once they send you out in the community, it's a different network and you go through like a care in the community provider, and that's all well and good. My experience now, and SteveO can back this up, is that sometimes when we are dealing with the VA on one hand and the care in the community provider on the other hand, these two organizations talk to each other and they don't necessarily get back to the veteran with information that is needed. I was out for an appointment yesterday. I showed up at the appointment and they said, hey, like we talked to the VA this morning and this appointment isn't authorized. The authorization has not been processed. And I was like, well, when was that? And it was at 10 in the morning. Really? It's 2 o'clock now and I'm at the VA. So why would you have the VA and the provider talk to each other and then not come back to the veteran and say, hey, like you can't go to your appointment today. It's been canceled. And in these times of COVID, obviously, I'm going to an outside provider in Honolulu in like a big healthcare, in the big Straub healthcare network, where there's a whole bunch of doctors and a big parking garage, and it kind of runs like a hospital. It is a hospital. It runs like a hospital. So you show up there and you have to, park and then walk through a bunch of places where there's a whole bunch of people that you haven't been around, and you're wearing your mask, and you have to do that whole thing. So to take a vet, and I'm fine with like that's fine. I'm going for a medical appointment. I get it. But to then expose me or any vet to this without having called me to tell me, hey, my appointment is actually canceled and I showed up for no reason and I paid $3 for parking. That's a big deal, but I still paid $3 for parking, right? And then you go and you don't get anything done. All you do is waste a couple hours of your life and expose yourself to a whole bunch of people that you wouldn't necessarily be around. It's very, very frustrating. So again, this takes us back to, you have to just keep talking to the VA. You have to be your own advocate. And if you can't be your own advocate and you need help with that, there's resources out there that you should reach out to be your advocate for the VA. So that is my experience yesterday. That is my soapbox that I was on. I'll turn it over to SteveO if he wants to say anything about his experiences.
So I don't think we have enough podcast hours for that, but I will tell you that. So what you went through is all too common. So it's
all too common.
It is all too common, and I get that every day. So it's funny that it seems like I live for the VA system because I have issues that come up, and again, like you're saying. It's funny that with the whole COVID thing, I'll get a call from the VA and they'll go, hey, we've got an appointment for you for this or that, right? A test or to see a doc. And I'll go and I go through all the rigmarole to get through into the place to make sure that I'm not carrying a disease. And then when I get to the place, I go in and I'm able to see a doc, right? Then I'll get an appointment from another doctor that works in the same hallway. And then he'll say, well, you've got to get a COVID test before you can come and see me. And I go, well, why do I got to get a COVID test to see you? I didn't have to see the guy in the office next to you. And then I realize is that they're letting every doctor make their own decisions about their own guests, which is us. That's a problem. Or they'll call me and they'll say, hey, I know you have an appointment like you had, but we can't see you now because the doctor's not seeing anybody. So we're going to send you out in town. And you're going to get a call from community care like you had. And then
which you may or may not ever get.
Right, which I never get. So then I have to call them and beat them down and beat them down and beat them down. And then like you said, I just had an MRI yesterday and they called me. They did call me the contractor, but they called me like every day to confirm the appointment every day. And I said, why are you calling me? We confirmed this. And they go, oh, well, because the VA sent in another order. I go, is it for a different thing? And they go, no, it's for the same thing. I go, you guys got to stop calling me. I have the appointment on this day, this time, I'm going to be there. Like you said. And then if I ever hear from the doctor, like for the results, then what do you do? I mean, it is a nightmare. And you're right. If you don't advocate for yourself, if you don't know what your issue is, like think about all the vets who are out there who don't know how to deal with it, or they're not assertive. They're not a pain in the ass like we are.
And you're absolutely right, because it does depend on the outside provider. Because some people they call and remind, and it's constant. And some people never call and then don't call when they cancel you. Right. The other thing that kind of killed me in this case was this appointment was previously scheduled. It was canceled because the doctor stopped seeing patients due to COVID. And then by the time the reason that I wasn't able to be seen yesterday was because when they rescheduled it, it had gone past the original authorization that was provided by the doctor. Even though it was canceled by the doctor due to COVID, it was, I guess it was my responsibility to realize that this had expired and go back and fix it, which to me is baffling, because you don't know, like no one tells you. The doctor doesn't tell you that.
Well, so look, so there's a couple takeaways here. So
there's a lot of takeaways.
So first off, anybody who's watching this, I want you to, if you don't have any experience with the VA or you're new to it, like Joe's been 2 years now, this is his primary healthcare system. I've been dealing with him for many years, for a decade.
At least.
So I would say this: if you think that the whole COVID thing just kind of like muddied it up a little bit, and you understand that, you should realize that this is the way the VA is pre-COVID, and you're going to be this way post-COVID. So the takeaway is like Joe said, if you don't know what you need and what you're doing, if you don't second guess these people and make them do their job, then you're going to get lost in the system. You're never going to get the stuff done. The other thing is that this should be a lesson for anybody who wants who wants government healthcare. This is it. This is what you're going to get. The stuff that Joe and I are dealing with, it doesn't cost us anything. Some vets it does, but for us it doesn't. But this is what you're getting, folks. You're waiting in line. So you want to get to the head of line, you become the biggest voice in the room, right, Joe?
Yeah. I mean, I for one feel like we live in a country where everybody, we clearly have enough money to give everybody health care. Like that's not something that should be too hard for our country to figure out. But community health care and, healthcare being run entirely by the government is not necessarily the model that we want to move to, because anything, my humble opinion of government is anything that's run by the government is an overbearing bureaucracy of disorganization where people don't necessarily talk to each other or necessarily really care about the care that they're providing. They care about getting their 8 hours in at work, and they care about making sure they fill out their TPS forms properly. But that's like, that's their primary focus, not necessarily the care you're getting.
Yeah, so that actually will be a great discussion for us in the future about because I agree with you. I would love to see everybody who needs healthcare should get healthcare. And I just think that it should be somewhat of a hybrid. Maybe the government pays for it.
It needs to be a hybrid system where everyone has access. Everyone needs to have access to healthcare. And
that's the key, is access to quality, top-notch healthcare. I should be able to, American citizen, you should be able to have the same healthcare that your senators and congressmen get, because I promise you, it's high quality stuff, right? They're getting the best drugs. So you want to make sure that you're not going to the guy down the street who's making drugs in his backyard. You want the guy who they're using. So right? I mean, I'm looking for a metaphor. That's my metaphor.
Yeah, the guy down the street making drugs in his backyard.
That's right. You don't want that guy.
So okay, anyway. You're going to introduce our next guest, SteveO. We're going to do season 2, episode 2, Veteran Voices with Joe and SteveO. Tell us who we have as a guest today. Yeah, so today we're interviewing Jon Cannon. So Jon is a retired Navy commander. Jon is a great guy. You're going to see he's a lot of fun. We really
we picked kind of a subject that is light, especially with all the stuff going on today. We need kind of a lighthearted little adventure. So, I served during the Cold War, and I remember growing up. Joe probably got the tail end of it. When it was all about spycraft and about our common enemy, which was the Soviet Union, right? And Joe and I were talking a minute ago about, like all the drama on TV in those days. In the 80s was Ronald Reagan getting up there and reminding all of us that the nukes were coming, and that he was our number one defense. And trust me, everybody took it seriously. And it was in your face, but it was also kind of fun, and it wasn't like you didn't worry about it every day. We didn't have 24 hours of every second was about, Russia and China coming to get us. We just knew it was there. And then, so we talk about that. So we're going to talk a little bit to John about the spycraft and about media and about all that kind of stuff. And it's, kind of a sexy look back at the past of, kind of what I wish times were like today, right? So anyway, so that's what we're doing. So we hope you enjoy it. Joe and I are back, and we're gonna have fun with this. And make sure that you let us know what you think, good or bad or indifferent. We want to know that you're out there, and that we can help you. And again, Joe, we're gonna be talking about some serious stuff too here in coming issues, or episodes, right? Yeah, right. So here we go.
That's right. We're the digital age. We're using episodes and not issues.
That's right. So Joe, you want to take us out?
So here's our guest today, Jon Cannon. Enjoy, everybody.
Yeah, where I live. So John, you want to give us a little up to date on who you are?
Yeah, sure. Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Just retired recently, 31 years in the Navy. And prior to that, a lot of, as my mom used to say, my lost years. So let's just get on with the conversation.
So congratulations on your retirement.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so it's quite a relief, right? It's I noticed that you're getting a little shaggy. You're starting to look like a homeless guy.
I'm loving it, actually. This is my wife pointed out recently that I think this is the longest hair I've had since 1987. So the problem I have is that my hair is falling out at a rate faster than it grows. So I think it's reached its maximum length. Give it another month, and it may all come out.
I had to put on a hat this morning because mine was like down in front of my eyes. So I just threw everything back and threw on the headset. The headset's new for season 2. So I can hear myself better, and we can hear the mics better, and we can do all that kind of good stuff.
But we also wanted to kind of lighten it up a little bit. So I came up with this idea to talk about something that I've been doing, which during the COVID lockdown years now that we have, which seems like years, people are watching a lot of TV, right? so I've been watching this TV show called a Berlin Station, which is like a spy intrigue show on Epix or Amazon. And but it made me think about like coming up like in the Cold War days, and like John, you can attest to this. I think Joe's a couple years younger than us, but life was, like people don't think about all of the drama that we had back in those days, even if it was kind of subtle, about the threat that was over us all when we would have to have, nuclear bomb drills and hide under your desk, like that was going to make any difference if a bomb dropped. But I've always been kind of intrigued by that. So I started looking at like movies from the past and stuff. And one of the ones that was most interesting to me was this movie Falcon and the Snowman back in the 80s. And I remember I worked in a comm center and in an intel shop, and we were told one day our boss came in and he said, everybody has to read this book, Falcon and the Snowman. You have to read it because it's got code words in it, and it's got spy stuff, and it's probably, we're not allowed to talk about it, but you got to read it. So you remember that kind of, right, John?
Oh, absolutely. And, this was a time where, growing up, you grew up understanding you were simply never going to visit a third of the world. China, Soviet Union, Eastern Europe was offhand. You were literally never going to go there. You simply accepted that as it was always going to be that way. You mentioned Falcon and the Snowman. During my lost years, as I mentioned earlier, I was hitchhiking about, and I was living in Mexico for a while in Cuernavaca, and I was at a bar, and met somebody who got sick, and they were an extra in a movie. So I was asked, hey, you want to come down and fill in this part? So on that day I was hired, and I was actually in Falcon and the Snowman as an extra, as somebody who had absolutely no concern or interest in the subjects that we're talking about. Just a 20-year-old who's living in Mexico, drinking a lot of beer.
Was that your pre-Navy days?
That's actually an excellent question. Yes, it was. I went from that to becoming a banker in it was Chemical Bank, now it's JP Morgan Chase, into the Navy. But the Falcon and the Snowman was a fascinating spell, just because for a couple of days, got to see what that world was like in Hollywood's view, and to see that carry over into movies like was it Berlin Station or Atomic Blonde, or movies like that, which are all good movies, but they all ask you to stretch your imagination. You agree that we agree that this is fictional. It's a wonderful series, by the way, Berlin Station, but I doubt the inside of the government bureaucracy is full of the latest computers, and the everybody drives a BMW.
Well, right. That was probably the part that troubled me the most. Was I kept thinking and watching that show that, these guys are living in like private quarters. Like, I know, being overseas, that the government kind of controls everything if you work for the government. So I would imagine that at the State Department or the CIA or whatever that Berlin Station is, that they'd probably be living in a controlled building or something, or floor. So
no, in a place like Berlin, living out in town, of course, places, a little more desolate, it'd be controlled. But in Western Europe, I'm sure, I would imagine if you get on the the transit system in DC and look at the poor working stiffs, commuting to work, that's your person, and they're living in that kind of home.
Right. Well, so
I don't know. I mean, in my travels dealing with people in the State Department, for 2 years of my career, when I was in Europe, I was on the flag staff. So we just traveled around and basically went to dinner parties. Like, that was sort of our job, I think. It was right before the Libya thing went down. So we were in this time of just cocktail party engagement around the world. And we did a little bit of stuff yeah, well, you and I were on the staff at the same time, but I worked in Banyoli at the NATO base.
Oh, okay.
And you were a capo, right?
That's right. Right.
So we were there at the same time, and it was great. So like when we did Germany a couple times, went to Berlin. The embassy there is beautiful. Like, everybody was set up in like a really nice place. You'd end up in any of these countries at the Navy attaché or the defense attache's house, and they always had these pretty sweet government subsidized ads.
So yeah. So there are two types, and I believe so. When I was in Kenya, there are designated personnel at embassies, and they are the host. And
yes,
the folks who are designated as host, as you just described, live in truly wonderful quarters, because they are hosting delegates all the time. In fact, I believe there's a requirement several days out of the week to do that. So they're very good.
Yeah, without a doubt. And then so we're talking about the people that were not necessarily on the roster.
Right. Right. The other folks who did not want to associate or, professionally be known. Right. The guy in the end of the bar who you'd never guess. That's the guy we're talking about.
Right. Which is kind of what really intrigued me about all of this, was like back in the 70s and in the 80s, being in the military, even if you were like, young and stupid, kid, wearing one stripe or something, there were definitely people out there who were kind of interested in you. Even if you were nobody, there was a chance that you had access to somebody. So I remember once I was, like 18, and I was on a train in going to Tokyo one day, and this kind of weird Japanese guy, he just starts talking to me, right? Which would happen a lot in Japan, because everybody wants to speak English or practice it. So I remember the guy stopping me and saying, just start speaking English to me. And then by the end of the train ride, I was like, he was inviting me to go like to go to the clubs. So I was like, this is kind of cool. Like, I don't have to pay for drinks or anything, right? Like yeah. I don't even go there, Joe. There was nothing funny going on. No, nothing nefarious.
SteveO's about to tell us the story about how he got roofied in Japan.
Yeah. So let me get my head back in gear there. But I remember, befriend this guy, and in Japan, if you met Japanese people, they take you out drinking, they would always want like a bottle of Johnny Walker Black or something, right? So, for $20, I could buy a bottle of Johnny Walker Black. It was like $100 for them. So I remember buying him a bottle of booze, takes me to a disco, and then we're talking, and then out of the blue, he just starts talking to me in phonetics, like Alpha, Bravo, Tango, like he's spelling things out to me like it's a code. And I was thinking, wow, this is freaking really weird. Like, what's this guy's trip? And then but I didn't think of it because I'm having a good time. The next day I get a call and he says, hey, Steve, could you get me a phone book from the base? And I'm thinking, that's kind of odd. Phone book from the base. Why would you want a phone book from the base? So the next day I went to work and I called the OSI, the Office of Special Investigations at the Air Force, and I told them about this guy. And then and I remember them telling me, okay, we're going to look into this person and we're going to get back to you. And then about a week later, I get a call from at work and somebody says, hey, Steve, your Uncle Bob's on the phone. I'm thinking, Uncle Bob? Like, I don't have an Uncle Bob. Like, I'm in Japan. Like, I don't have any family. Like, how could they even find me? And it's this OSI agent. So he starts telling me, hey, we're going to like give the guy the phone book. And we checked him out, and he's this Japanese Air Force colonel, and we think he's a Soviet spy and all this. So like for the next couple months, I'd get a call from Uncle Bob. I'd have to go and meet him at the post office. He'd flash his car lights at me, and I'd follow up in the mountains, and we'd go in a corner in a little bar in a little Japanese bar, and I'd debrief him. And then one day I thought it was kind of cool because I'm 19, right, or 18, and I remember thinking, this is a little bit too odd. Like, this is too much like a movie. So I went and I told this major that I work with, who was totally paranoid, okay? Completely untrusting of the government, right? I think he'd Vietnam vet, been maybe around too many explosions or something. And he told me, he goes, Steve, he goes, they're gonna, what's gonna happen? They're gonna have you go out one day. You're gonna give some information that they want you to give them, and then they're gonna arrest them, and then you're getting arrested too, and they're gonna deny that they ever knew you. He goes, you're gonna get killed and thrown in a river, and then they're gonna find you with 20 stab wounds in your back, and they're gonna say it was suicide. He goes, you better protect yourself. And I remember going to the OSI agent and going, hey, I gotta get like some protection or something. Like, does anybody know I'm doing this for you guys? And he goes, you can't tell anybody. I said, well, maybe a letter or something like from the commander. And he goes, you can't tell anyone. If you do, then we'll prosecute you. And I remember going to my commander right away, and my commander calls up the OSI commander, and they said, hey, leave this guy alone. He's like, got one stripe, right? You're like, what are you using him for? And it turned out it was like this rogue agent, OSI guy, who was just going to use me to get, like, who knows?
Oh, no, he recognized raw skill. He was obviously trying to recruit you for what you were made to do.
See, but this stuff would never, like, you would think it would never happen. But that stuff does happen. And,
absolutely. It's like when we were in Naples, I once went somewhere, and it was like a last minute, quick, get on a plane and go somewhere. So I into this capital, I checked into this hotel. It's probably 2 a.m. And I had like one of those, 2 a.m, crumpled business suit, sweaty, stank, hair is all over the place. And I'm in this elevator going up to my room, like the biggest sad sack in the universe. And the door opens up, and this statuesque woman, young 20s, and I'm, I think 49 at the time, gets on the elevator and says to me in the most enthusiastic voice, hi, what do you want to do tonight? I just won a lottery ticket here, and I just don't know what to do. And I look at the mirror, and all those training classes come back, Have a good night. Yes, they do happen.
Yeah. So anyway, so I was thinking that, it's kind of an interesting subject matter. And then when I watch like Berlin Station, because they take themselves so seriously, back in the 70s and 80s, and probably even before that, you know, a lot of those movies were really serious. Like 3 Days of the Condor was like, you know, completely anti-government, right? It was really a leftist view of that whole genre. But you know, we were surrounded by it. And then like my favorite movie of all time from those days, a spy movie, it's called, you probably never heard of it. It's called Hopscotch. And Hopscotch was about a disgruntled CIA agent who hates his boss. So he's a typical government worker, and he just hates his boss. His boss is a douchebag. And he decides that his boss is trying to get him out of the field and put him behind a desk. So he decides that he's going to write a tell-all book about the CIA, and he starts sending out these chapters to all of the intelligence people in all the agencies around the world. And every week they get this, and all of the antics that he's exposing are like, it's all inside stuff, but it's all centered around his boss. Like, so all the bad shit that happens is always tied to his boss. So he's exposing him and embarrassing him. So they decide that they're going to go and they've got to kill him. Right. And it's really funny. It's got Walter Matthau in it. You know, he's just kind of this bumbling.
It echoes, what's the movie Burn After Reading?
Is it that way too?
You know, it's right, bumblingness, you know, in the government. But, you know, it's funny that all these movies, you know, I tend to look back at the movies of the 70s and 80s of the Cold War and agencies and things like this, and I tend, by my own generational prejudice, you know, to believe them more. But at the time, the fact of the matter is, when I was watching them in the 70s and 80s, I had no basis to believe them other than my own prejudice. Whereas today, I look at the Berlin Station, and things just flare out at me about what's wrong with them. And the fact of the matter is, they're equally flawed. You know, it's just that with experience, you now can see the things. But to kids today, and general audiences today who are looking at it at Berlin Station today, or Atomic Blonde, which is a great movie but just fun, you know, they look at it with the same vision that we were looking at it, you know, being an 18-year-old kid in Japan, you know.
Well, I think Hollywood has a history of not really ever getting it exactly right, which is both good and bad for us in the long run when we're serving.
Right.
Well, and I think that, you know, with our experience in the military or working for the government, they really are serious. Like, you know, they take that stuff very seriously. And, you know, and today it's all really kind of centered around like the computer element, or like the technology element, right? That people phishing and this kind of stuff. But back in those days, it was completely different because we didn't have computers and everything was personal. So you would be attracted, or you might have somebody be, you know, stop you on the street or in an elevator and somewhat innocently like getting you like in a social situation, and then pretty soon, you know, who knows what they get you going.
So actually, you bring up, you know, so technology. So actually, if you look back at the inventions at the time developed for this tradecraft, it's pretty amazing. You know, the mechanical engineering was at its zenith. So when you look at actual cameras, forget the kind of film and cameras. We're talking about actual film cameras brought down to a size that you can, you know, do this with. Some of the tiny machines made by hand were actually pretty astonishing. You know, the radios that they had to fit into certain places without this miniaturization that you have today. It really came down to tiny gears.
Well, you know, something that is interesting, John, is that they would have all this technology or they'd have to refine technology to be able to make it kind of disappear, you know?
Right. And again, you're dealing with the law of physics at the time. I mean, the laws of physics are consistent, but the mechanical craft at the time, you know, to actually hide a wire. Or speaking of Berlin, they have the museum about folks sneaking across the wall. It's right on Checkpoint Charlie Museum, whatever. And they go into the folks in East Germany who made things to sneak over the border. And of course, you had like the family that made their balloon, which took off from the roof and sailed over. But you also had a family that literally, I think, they rebuilt an engine, and they made the engine in a car so that the engine only 2 cylinders worked, and there was a huge cavity that I think they had 2 hours to cross before the person got burnt to death. But but the fact was, in their basements, they were making this crap. So yeah,
That's great.
The history of how suddenly Berlin was cut off from the rest of the world is just, I mean, it's just fascinating. You know, they shut down the train system overnight, and people
yeah, right, absolutely. Sudden, families separated completely right away. Yeah, there's a book I'm reading about German generals, fascinating book, psychology behind it. But they were talking about a number of the Germans, generals, officers, when they came back from the Russian front and retired from the military when they were like in 1944 and retired there, or were on their way back when literally the Russians came in. And so, you know, I'm on the front for 4 years and I come back, and now for the rest of my life, I can't see my family. You know?
Yeah.
Sounds
Yeah, I mean, it was a crazy time, that Cold War, and the way Germany ended up divided up. And then, you know, equally how quickly the wall came down when it came down is another, it's like a one-day event, and really surrounded by somebody in government in East Germany making an unapproved announcement that they were just going to allow people to cross the border by accident. Like it was an incorrect memo that he sent out that allowed the border to be open.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, you know, it's interesting, John. So that kind of falls into another interesting film that I think was based on fact, and because it had Tom Hanks in it, it's much more serious, and they try to stick, I guess, probably as close to the novel or the real experience. But I think it was Bridge of Spies. So in Bridge of Spies, the spy that was going to be exchanged, that the Russian spy that they had, he was doing the, you know, he was just living an unassuming life. He was like, nobody knew, he was just some guy, but he was like a colonel in the Soviet military, and he'd been in the States for years, kind of just as a plant. And then he would, when he was making his film or getting his little microfilm, he'd put it like in a nickel. Right. And so he had to break open this nickel, and it was really meticulous and took a lot of time. And even when he got caught, he was just nonchalant, because he knew eventually, you know, he was going to be done. But it was really interesting that they used Checkpoint Charlie, of course, and all of the intrigue, and they had to use Tom Hanks' character as like an intermediary, somebody who really, that both sides thought they could trust, but neither one of them could trust him, right? And he ended up kind of screwing him at the end with because he wanted to get that agent out, or that.
Yeah, so I think that was a great movie in terms of, you know, I think the general population in the U.S., you know, these are wonderful stories. You know, this is a great conversation, great talk. And what's sad is that, you know, the vast majority of Americans have no idea about Checkpoint Charlie and whatnot. And therefore, it's, for all the flaws in the movie, it's a good thing that this movie comes out, and the population is a little more, you know, knowledgeable about our own past. You know.
Well, I think that's and so bringing that, so that's actually a good way to kind of bring it into today, is that the things that you see today in this subject matter are either completely outlandish, like the Bourne series, which actually were great novels, you know, but I think that was John Ludlam, right? Didn't John Ludlam, or was it John Le
Carre? Yeah. So Dogs of War, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, these were all great books, and they really were. And so I think they just simply had to update the Bourne out of the Cold War into modern day circumstance. But, you know, it's one of these movies where, you know, we all agree that it's fiction and we have a good time. So, you know, they're enjoyable. It's no different than James Bond movies, which I continue to go see, even though perfectly fanciful, you know. Well,
except of course for the Moore days of the 70s, when it was completely a big joke.
Those are Monty Python. I'm not sure.
but anyway, I was just thinking that this is kind of like a fun subject to kind of touch on, because it gives us the ability to kind of, reach back into our own time capsule and look at how the world has changed so much, especially because today we hear about this stuff every day on the news about, with China, stealing information or proprietary information, and companies or people, because they want money, and a lot of this stuff is sanctioned by our governments, which 30 years ago they never would have been. It just wouldn't have become so mainstream and so normal that people don't even think about it anymore. They don't fantasize about it. It's not glamorous. In those days, the movies that we watched and the books that we read about the spy craft and all that was intriguing, and it was very romanticized, right? But today you don't hear about that. I mean, it doesn't have that same kind of escape.
Well, I think we're at the end of a cycle. I mean, you can go back to a number of ridiculous movies, The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and whatnot from the 60s and whatnot, where it was brought to a ridiculous format. But I think we're at the end of a run. We've had 20 years after 9/11 of movies made as close as they can to being documentary-esque. The whole feel of I was there. This is the real format, and speakers and books about what actually happened. But I think that, especially in the last couple of months or so, I think we've turned a corner, and I think military's had its run. I don't mean in a bad way or good way. I simply mean that it's probably akin to the 1970s, where it's been 2 decades of fighting, and the population is turning more into another direction.
That's really interesting. So overall, when you say that, John, what do you mean? You see the population turning in a different direction, and the military's had its good run. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think first of all, the boomers are, and I'm a boomer, are retiring and becoming less influential, and the populations before us are becoming larger in number, and therefore more influential in media, in politics, and consumer habits and things like that. And when you look back at any World War II, when it ended, the things that carried on after World War II, epaulettes on styles and things like this, French perfumes, Italian fashion, because America was recently introduced to these things. And that lasted for a couple of decades, as well as short haircuts. Then Vietnam happened. And after a period of several decades, the population is weary and frankly bored. So if I were to come out and write a book right now about, Iraq 15 years ago, I, as a participant, and I'm not saying I was, but any participant of that might still be living in that moment 15 years ago. Whereas somebody 20 years younger might go, I hardly remember it. Think back at the 90s of the Vietnam vet, and nothing against Vietnam vets. I have the utmost respect, but I recall as a teenager in the 80s, and to me, Vietnam was a zillion years ago, even though it was only 10 years before, even actually 5 years before, from the complete in 1975 to when I graduated high school in 1980. It's only 5 years, and yet it was a zillion years before. And in my mind, didn't matter. So today there are kids, and not just kids, there are people in their 30s, early 40s, 20s, who 9/11 it might as well be Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, I mean, that's exactly true, right? So people who are serving in the military, people who are enlisting in the military today may not have been born yet when 9/11 happened.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And so that defining, that was certainly a defining moment in my military career, right? 9/11 happened. I was 4 years into my service, right? I was a Lieutenant JG when it occurred. And so that defined my service for the remainder of my time in the military.
Right.
And I think the people that are joining the military now, they're joining the military in this COVID outbreak, right? So they're having a completely different experience of how the military works. What is it like to deploy? How do we run ships, and how do we run our military units to prevent like disease from spreading in the unit, right? Like it's something we never even considered. So it's a very, very different experience.
And just also the cultural appreciation for the military. I mean, I go back to the movie Stripes in the 1980s, and this is before Top Gun came out, where the attitude in the population was the people who joined the military was kind of like Bill Murray and Stripes.
Well, yes. Because they were.
Because they were. Right?
Yeah. No, well, that's actually perfect, because Joe and I have talked about it before. When I was going in the military, like today, the Air Force is arguably the hardest to get in, right? And they're, because they're so selective.
Oh my God, we're gonna talk about how amazing the Air Force is.
No.
What about Space Force? Let's talk about Space Force.
Space Force, I do like that. But I wasn't gonna say. I'm not trying to glorify how great it was or bad it was. I'm just wanted to point out that today, they would have never accepted somebody like me. I was a high school dropout, and I was lucky enough that I had enough brain cells to get me through a GED. And I passed it, and they had lowered their standards so that people could get in, because Vietnam was only a few years earlier, and people, like you said, John, the American culture had enough. The people weren't going in the military, so they were doing anything they could to get people to come in. Now that changed. It started to like evolve a little bit, get a little bit more serious. But by the time, like after 9/11. It was a serious world, right?
Yeah. So first of all, let me just say that you didn't drop out of high school. You simply surpassed the expectations and what the high school could do for you. So let's just.
Okay. I don't remember it that way. I remember it was more of an ultimatum, but I read the tea leaves and moved on.
But the requirements of the military were also far different. I mean, you went to Europe in the 60s. Even when I first got there. You had millions of people were there, and the expectations were, casualties on day one were going to be hundreds of thousands of people, so.
Yeah. So I think we're at about our half hour mark here. So I really think that's kind of what I got. I'm thinking that this was a kind of a fun conversation to have. I think you guys would agree. Hopefully people watching it will be intrigued a little bit by our discussion, but even the most lighthearted kind of talk can, is a serious one.
Let's go first. I was going to say, let's just go full circle, which is, this has been wonderful. Everybody who hasn't done it already, go back and look at your VA benefits and get your housing benefits.
I did want to ask John who that dude looking over his shoulder this whole interview has been.
Oh, this is our house guard. So I picked this up in Africa. See all the nails beaten into him. That's the pain he's willing to take to protect your house. So I keep him here in this room.
Those are nails?
Those are nails. He's been beaten into a wooden statue.
So that's interesting. So Joe, cool. Don't you have something like that protects your home, or no? In Hawaii, you must have.
I have a rooster that I have guarding my home. He's in the other room. Really? I'll bring him in next time.
So I think that this was a lot of fun. Joe?
Hey, I just want to say thanks everybody for joining us for Veterans Voices with Joe and SteveO. We appreciate you listening. If you have any feedback or comments, please hit us up in the comments section on YouTube or Instagram or Twitter or whatever social media preference you have out there.
Yeah. So, John, any parting thoughts?
Thanks for having me on. This is fun.
Yeah, right on. So hopefully, we'll be able to, if you're into it, we'd like to probably have you again. And this is a lot of fun, and we move along. So, okay. So I think that's it, right?
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Hey.